Okay, particularly IFRS 5 discontinued operations. This term operations, it's belong to income statement, discontinued operations. And you know very well, since the F7 subject, that if the presentation is about the um, income statement, that's called continued and discontinued operation. So this is the pro forma, and this is the minimum performer. That's you should have to split the operations into continued and discontinued. Let's take an example. Let's say an example. For example, I hope that all of you people uh, heard about the company that is the Unilevers. Previously, the Lever Brothers. Now the Unilever company. And for example, um, they have multiple operations. That's the foods, beverages, confectioners, and a separate unit of the ice cream, edible oil. For example, one of the operations, one of the operation of the edible oil, um, they have decided to discontinue. And subject to this, the discontinued operation criteria have met. So, and the year is 2017. So Unilever's disclose the income statement or present the income statement in this format. Edible oil is a discontinued operation, and other than edible oil, all of the business operations are continued operations. And in the income statement, the front line, the separate line item, the term discontinued operations, that is profit from the period from the discontinued operations. Profit for the period from the discontinued operations. It's in the front of the financial statement, front of the income statement. This separate line item should be present, and the details of this profits or loss from the discontinued operation will be mentioned as a separate note item. As a separate note item. As a separate note item. So this one is the game. This one is the matter. Now, so the important point is that what are the criteria based on the IFRS 5 which should be met for this presentation. So now we have to consider the definition and nothing else, only the matter of definition. In SBR exam, don't worry, examiner will never ask you to make this category presentation. It's not the case. It's not about the making of the presentation. This is not the exam. Yes, but the examiner will can definitely ask about what are the conditions for this presentation that need to be made. Yes, see this. This one is important. The definition is very much important. Huh? Discontinued operations. Yes. Number one, for discontinued operation, the terminology, first terminology, the standard use, the component. To remember that this term component, the whole of the accounting standards only used by the accounting standard in this IFRS 5. That's all. Only for IFRS 5 and discontinued operation, the terminology is used, the term component. What is the meaning of the term component? What is the meaning of the term component? For an entity, for any entity, where the operations, where the operations are separately distinguished, operations and cash flows are separately distinguished. So each distinguished units is called component. For example, earlier I provided an example of Unilevers. So you can imagine that internally, Unilevers provide one income statement for all the business operations. But internally, edible oil has different income statement, that is called operations. Income statements is called operations. Confectioner means, for example, shampoos, detergents having separate income statement. Food, for example, walls, separate income statement and cash flows. Beverages, for example, tea, coffee, has separate income statement balance sheet. Means they have a system to isolate the divisions and preparing its own income statement. So whatever we are disclosing a discontinued operation, this statement is very much clear, very much important. Whatever um, whatever the operations we are going to disclose, their presentation should be available for their income statement. Their presentation for the income statement should be available. Let's take more examples. Let's take, for example, a chain of restaurants having 4 restaurants. But internally, they are making the income statement of combined one business. That is the restaurants. They are not internally making the 4 different income statement and the cash flows of each restaurant. And the management has decided to sell one of the restaurant. So that one restaurant is not considered as a discontinued operation because the income statement and cash flows are not available. In this restaurant business, the component is not individual restaurant, rather than a complete business of 4 restaurants is a component. In the case of Unilever's, the edible oil division available for the edible oil presentation of operations and cash flows are available. That is called the component. Edible oil unit is component. For example, bank has a business of investment banking, retail banking, and consumer banking. For example, the bank wants to withdraw the consumer banking. So normally in the banks, the retail banking, investment banking, and consumer banking operations and cash flows are separately available. So that's bank discontinued operations. Income statement, cash flows are available. That's the game. So before entering to the term discontinued operation, before entering to the term for the discontinued operations, you have to understand the terminology component. A component of an entity is one that has a operations, means income statement, and cash flows that can be clearly distinguished operational and reporting purpose from the rest of the entity. Number two, before entering to the definition, now think Unilevers 2000, for example 2018, listen this statement very carefully. 2018 Unilevers edible oil, one component, listen carefully, either disposed of or considered as a held for sale. For example, 2017 Unilever has during the year has sold the edible oil unit. Has sold the edible oil unit. That means they don't have asset right now. They don't have asset right now. All the liability pay off, all the asset dispose of the edible oil. But the income statement presentation of 17 should be classified continued and discontinued, because user of the financial statement should be aware that with the transparent reporting that the discontinued operations profit or loss will not be continued in the next year. Number two, it may possible that, listen carefully, this next statement is very much important. Component number one, already sold or classified as held for sale. Classified as held for sale. What does that mean? Unilever's 2017 year edible oil as a disposal group. What I said? Disposal group. What is that terminology? Non-current asset held for sale. Means edible oil unit or division has not yet sold, but all the IFRS 5 non-current asset held for sale as a disposal group criteria have met. And in the balance sheet, we have already recognized as a non-current asset held for sale as a disposal group, and the liability associated with the non-current asset held for sale as a current asset and current liability respectively. So even though the edible oil units has not sold, but still classified as held for sale. So if it's classified as held for sale and it's a component, then the income statement presentation should also be applicable as income statement presentation, that is discontinued operation. So my two different examples, already sold or classified as held for sale. already sold means only the term of component. Classified held for sale means disposal group plus component. And do remember one thing. In case of in case of uh, abandon, in case of abandon, it's not non-current asset held for sale. But if it is component, if it is component means as a disposal group, its income statement and cash flows is separately available, then discontinued operation classify. Then discontinue operations classify. In the case of abandon, no? For if do remember, if abandon is a single asset, one non-current asset, then how it's possible that income statement presentation of one asset? No, because one asset not meeting the definition of component. And very important thing, any subsidiary acquire exclusive for resale. If any of the subsidiary acquire exclusive for resale, it's by default, it's by default discontinue operations classify. So component already sold, component classified held for sale, discontinue operation. Discontinue operation. If component abandon, discontinue operation. And this subsidy is by default component. But do remember one thing. Based on this, already sold, classified held for sale. Leave it abandoned, leave it subsidy acquired exclusive for sale. If any component already sold or classified held for sale, and it shows a separate major line of business. In my case, Unilever's edible oil is a separate major line of business. Of course, if case of restaurant, each restaurant is a component. So one individual restaurant, if it's a component, separate major line of business. Or geographical area operations. In my case, 4 different restaurants are components. So each area is a geographical area. Take one other example. Take another example. In case any of the airline, for example, Cathay Pacific, 2006, decided to withdraw the operations from the South Asia, all the division of the South Asia, because in the airline they are actually making a making a segment of business on region wise. So they have, for example, 7 regions. They have made 7 regions, and each region is a component. And 2007, Cathay Pacific decided to withdraw or lift up the operations from the South Asia. So that means either the component has been disposed of or held for sale and represents either a separate major line of business. If in my example, airline, the component which is going to sell, it's not separate major line of business, but the geographical area is a separate. So either separate major line of business or geographical area of operations. So in my Unilever's example, edible oil, separate major line of business as compared to food, beverages. In my airline example, in my restaurant example, each restaurant is a, for example, component and it's going to sell or already sold. So separate geographical area. 7 regions of the airline, 1 region closed. So it's not separate major line, it's a separate geographical area operations. And leave for the time being B point. That's enough. So component, so the conclusive point, income statement presentation for transparency of and the clarity to the user of the financial statement, more informative, that's continue, discontinue, but how this classification meets, if the definition meets, that's component. So candidates, it's all done with respect to the IFRS 5.